everyone, welcome to History on Trial. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator. We're going to be talking about purity laws or purity rules, purity theories, and biosocial identities. This issue of purity, blood purity, racial purity, keeps coming up in discussions, and we're going to look at an example of this. Now, what's interesting is that purity laws and purity rules are usually used by those who are considered oppressors against those who are oppressed. And so what's really interesting is when those who have been oppressed by these purity rules actually take on these purity rules for themselves. And then you have an issue wherein individuals are asserting all sorts of purity rules that theoretically apply to themselves. But when you look at some of the historical notations, you cannot find any support for the purity rules that people are advancing or advocating. And so we're going to look at two groups. We're going to discuss two groups that may be intersecting and may not be intersecting, but these are the two groups that tend to comment on these purity issues or assert these purity issues with respect to race and culture and identity, and sometimes you see some of it leading into some discussions or conflations with religion. And so we're going to be looking at individuals who identify with being Hebrew, biblically Hebrew, and those who identify with being American Indian. And again, there's sometimes conflation with those two groups also. And this is just one example of a discussion that took place related to how you classify people who have varying backgrounds in terms of having a mother from one ancestral group and then a father from another ancestral group. And in this case, you have a negation of the father. Often you see a negation of the mother. And so the individuals will often assume that the totality of the identity, that ancestry, is wrapped up in the father or it's wrapped up in the mother. And in this case, you see it being more wrapped up in the mother. Usually you see this when an individual identifies in a particular way, and then giving more credence to that particular identity versus other identities. So you may see individuals who may say that a child is whoever the mother is. And so if they come from a matrilineal culture, they may look at it that way. Or you may see someone who says the child is whoever the father is. Now, this is related to lineal descent in terms of claiming rights within a clan or a tribe. However, this does not comport with biology. And so we're going to look at biology, and we're going to see that children come from two parents. You don't just have a father or a mother. And we're just going to quickly look at this phenotype purity dynamic. There are a number of individuals who assert a belief in the phenotype of ancient groups of people. And those phenotypes tend to be related to skin color and hair texture and things like that. And there are also all sorts of racial purity assertions related to this. Now, what's interesting is with racial purity assertions, there's often the negation of or the ignoring of any diversity in the ancient group's background or in the background of the individuals who are currently asserting this identity. And this is one of those examples you have with Laban, some people might say Laban. And this is the father-in-law of the biblical Jacob. And so the father-in-law of the biblical Jacob, the father of Rachel and Leah, this father is identified again as the father-in-law of Jacob. However, when you look at this name has a particular meaning. And when you look off to the right, it relates back to this 3836. And Laban means white. Specifically, when you look down below, you see it means white. You see 24 occurrences of that, and then you see an occurrence of white ones for this Laban. And so this is a very interesting notation here because you have a father-in-law who would be the father of the daughters who married Jacob being identified as white. What's not clear, however, is what Jacob was. You do have clarity, however, about Esau's identity, and so Esau is described as being related to the color red. And please note, this is more of a questioning session than a lesson session. And so we're going to continue on here related to this purity of blood issue. And we're just going to make sure that everyone understands how people inherit these X and Y chromosomes. And so individuals inherit chromosomes from both the mother and the father. And the sex chromosomes, you have the X and the Y, and for females they have the XX, and then for males they have the XY. And so in some instances you will see that there is a focus on the Y chromosome, meaning the male heritage, and then sometimes you'll see a focus on the female heritage, which would be that X chromosome. And so with respect to what we're going to be looking at very quickly, we're going to be focusing on that Y chromosome being Shem, because that is a huge focus, and this X chromosome being related to Ham. And so Noah had these three sons, and they were Ham, Shem, and Japheth, or Japheth. And what you have in a couple of instances, now we're not going to go over all of the children of Jacob, but we're going to go over a couple of them. And we're going to see that this purity of blood assertion that is often out there does not make any sense, because you see some mixing of these lines, these patrilineal lines. You see some mixing with the daughters and the sons. And so what you see is the Y, Jacob, often mixed with the X being Canaan. Now what's interesting, because this question keeps coming up, is whether Jacob is related to, or is he an E or an R in terms of haplogroup. And right now I wouldn't say that it's possible to say with certainty which one is accurate. I have not seen the genetic information to support wholeheartedly either of these. And so Jacob could only be one, however. Whatever the haplogroup is, he can only be one. You can only have one, and then you can only have one father. And so that lineal descent would stay the same through successive generations. And so unless there's some really major fluke, you would not have those sons being variously E and R. And so it would have to be one or the other. Moving right along. And so we're going to look at two examples related to Jacob's sons, two sons. We're going to look at Judah and then Joseph. And what you see here is that Judah is identified as marrying someone named Shua, and she is identified as a Canaanite woman. And so here you see this breach of this blood purity dynamic. And then next you see with Joseph, this dynamic where Joseph marries an Egyptian woman, and this was done intentionally. And so you have Joseph marrying this Egyptian woman, and this was to solidify his identity as being related to the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians were considered also to be descendants of Ham, and so it's very interesting. You have two sons from this particular family who are having children with women who were understood as Canaanite women. And here you can see where the Hebrews associated the land of Egypt as the land of the Hamites. What's interesting about that is you often see Canaanites associated with American Indian. And so you see that there is this intermarriage going on between Canaanites and people who are understood as being descended from Jacob. And so we're going to carry on here because we have some other questions related to this Eber-Heber dynamic. And so you have Heber being identified as an ancestor of Christ, also being the father of some other individuals. And then you also see this Heber being related to Eber, And you also see Heber, as we'll see, related to descendancy attached to Cain. And here you can see Eber identified as a patriarch. And here we start to see some dynamics with the name Eber or Heber or Heber. You see a number of dynamics where this name means multiple things and is associated with different lines of ancestry. And so you see at one point it means region beyond, which the word Hebrew is sometimes understood as a particular region or a particular direction. But you also see this is related to descendancy through Shem and also the name of several Israelites. You're also going to see that this name is associated with a group known as the Canaanites. And here you see this name, Heber or Heber, related to the Keni or the Kenites. And this is an ancient people. You also see the name Eber or Heber associated with Scotland and the Hebrides. What's interesting about this is that this particular Heber or Heber is also associated with Moses. And so you have this name being associated with a variety of groups and also being derived from Cain. And so this brings up the question of whether this idea of blood purity is even realistic. Is there such a thing as blood purity? You have a number of individuals who are making these assertions in order to stand on this for either ancestral reasons or religious reasons. But the question is it realistic, and does it even comport with history? Is there any history or any other scientific data to support this idea of this blood purity? And you can see with just looking at two sons, Joseph and Judah, you have anything but blood purity. And you also see this dynamic with Moses. And so one of the things that happened historically is that blood purity was used to alienate children, American Indian children, from their ancestry. And so you would have, is the person full blood, a half blood, a quarter blood? You had all of these dynamics with people being mulatto and octoroon and quadroon. And this is to alienate people from their ancestry. What's odd, however, is when you see individuals who are claiming those identities also resting on these blood purity assertions. And so when people rest on these blood purity assertions, they should have something to back this up. Again, you see this going on with individuals who are claiming American Indian identity, but then resting on these blood purity dynamics. Also alienating children culturally from the father in one instance or from the mother in another instance. Now, one of the reasons why those who are identifying as American Indian might want to alienate the father is because oftentimes in history the father was not an American Indian. The father was Scottish, the father was Irish, the father was from one of the groups now identified in Africa as African, even though they may not have originally been from Africa. And so the question is, do you really have blood purity? And is this something that you can stand on? And is this something that you even want to assert? Or is this just pushing a particular agenda to place people, certain groups of people, in a particular light, usually a very positive light, by attempting to divorce those people from anything that would tarnish that good light? And so being associated with Canaanites, for those who are identifying as Hebrew, would be a tarnishing of that good light. It doesn't matter whether it's tarnishing or not. The truth is that children have chromosomes, they have genetic makeups from two parents. And so it's not really possible to just alienate biologically. It's not possible to alienate a child from both of those parents. And for those who are identifying as American Indian, it's very odd that would be something that people would be resting on. And sometimes it's used to attack those who are identifying as African American, suggesting that people can't be from two continents. That is completely ridiculous. Most people know that you can have a parent who was born on one continent and a parent who was born on another continent, and that the child should be able to claim the identities of both parents if those identities are accurate. And so because of that, you can have individuals who are European American or African American or Eurasian. So you can have a few variations there. Again, these are questions for people to think about, and if people have some answers, that would be great. You can put those in the comments section and we can discuss this. If you decide to make a discussion of your own, you can post the link to that discussion, and that can add to our information base. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.